We're about a minute in. Thank you for joining me this morning. Today, we're going to talk about advanced techniques for selecting products and services. And this is basically how to run a very specific type of project where the goal is to select something, to pick a software system to buy, or to select some consultants to come help you with something. We've got our topics for today are the high level steps. I'm going to go through the high level steps of what we're doing, explain why we need such a formal process for this. Then I'm going to talk about the deliverables for a selection, the three things that you must create to complete a selection. We'll talk about various ways of determining requirements, how to create a scorecard for scoring the proposals from the vendors, and then we'll talk about some techniques for reviewing and evaluating those proposals. So right off, what we're talking about is this presentation assumes that you have been asked to get a group of subject matter experts together and go out and pick a software solution or to find a vendor to help you solve some problem. And what you're going to do is create a document, and this could be an RFI, an RFQ, or an RFP. An RFI is something that you do when you're really unsure of how to proceed. It's a request for information. And typically, RFIs don't end in a selection. They're just a document that asks vendors to send in information about how they solve problems. An RFQ is on the other end of the spectrum. It's a request for quote. And this is when you know exactly what it is you want and you're just looking for proposals. But today, we're going to focus on the big item, the request for, you just wanted quotes. We're going to get the request for proposal. And this is where you have a problem that you want to solve. Either it's replacing a software system, maybe automating a manual process, or getting a set of consultants to come in and help you configure the system you already have. And what you're seeking is for a vendor to send you a proposal about how they would solve your problem. When you've got that RFP, we want to make sure that it's going to go to the procurement department, and we want to make sure that a copy of that request for proposal is sent to the known vendors in the space. These are the customers, excuse me, these are the companies that you already know exist that could probably help solve your problem. So you want to make sure that they know that you're asking for a proposal. But procurement's also going to post it on their website because organizations that sell solutions like this have teams of people that check on procurement websites every day to see if a new RFP happens to have come out. And this is a great way to find new vendors with new solutions that you didn't even know existed. We have implemented systems before at OU from vendors we did not know existed that turned out to be much less expensive than what we thought they were going to be. So you put that RFP out there, vendors find it, they write a proposal, they send it to you. Your job is to evaluate those proposals, perhaps conduct demonstrations and evaluate the demonstrations, especially if it's a software purchase, maybe review the references if they're needed, and then you choose the vendor with the best solution. So what I'm talking about today is how you, as a project manager in charge of running a selection project, could go through these 7 steps. Now, why are we doing this? Well, there's lots of reasons, but one of the first reasons is groupthink. And this is where somebody important in the room, you get all your subject matter experts together in a room or maybe a Zoom meeting and they're going to discuss it. But some important person says, oh, I really liked the ABC solution. And after that, all the subordinates in the room don't want to sound like they're contradicting the boss. So they all say, yeah, I like the ABC too, when really they may have more information. We don't want to have groupthink. We want to get everybody's opinion. And that leads us to this next reason, dominant voices. There are often in conversation those extroverts or those loud voices that tend to dominate the conversation. You need everybody's input, because extroverts don't make better decisions than introverts. In fact, they typically make worse decisions if there's enough time for the introvert to make decisions. Extroverts don't make better decisions. They make decisions faster. Introverts tend to be deeper thinkers, take longer to make a decision. Now, fast decisions is important. It's an important thing to have if you're on the battlefield, but we're not there. We want to go through this carefully and make the best decision we can. Another reason for the formal process is to avoid making a selection based on irrational information, like picking the system that was the prettiest one, that had the prettiest screens, or this vendor we're looking at, they've got this other product that we use and it's great, so whatever they're trying to sell us now must also be great. Or maybe you had demonstrations and somebody came in and they were really boring and they didn't do a very good job of explaining it, maybe. And so somebody says, that person was awful. I really hated that demonstration. So I don't want that product. And that doesn't necessarily make sense. Or the one I hear quite often, this one is the most expensive, so it must be the best. Not true. Another reason you want to have this formal process is driving a team to consensus instead of compromise. And this is one of the most important aspects of running this selection process the way I'm telling you today. Because if you get a group of important stakeholders, the people most concerned with how this is going to come out, to go through a process of selecting the very best system, and they feel like their voices were heard and that they have made a great decision based on coming to consensus about the best product, then you have started out on the right foot. You've got people that are already committed to the success of this implementation, and they are in on it because they've had their voice heard and they know that they're getting the very best solution that can be had. When you get folks into that mode, you are doing a great job of starting off your project. And then the last one is defending or justifying a selection. The vendors that don't win the RFP selection process can use open records to ask for the documentation that you used to make your decision. And if you have a formal scorecard with numbers on it that you can send to them, well, I can tell you that I've run multiple selection projects over the last 20 years. I've had vendors ask for the scorecards a dozen times, and I send them the scorecards, and then I never hear from them again because you're using numbers and real logic to make your selection. Okay, any questions or comments about that? Well, as I've mentioned in some of my other presentations, since we're doing this on Zoom, I can't see you really. I'm looking at my slides and I'm looking at the list of participants in case somebody speaks. So if you have a question or a comment, please feel free to turn on your mic and just interrupt me. All right, let's talk about the deliverables. You need to come up with three things in this process. The RFP, which is the request for proposal, and I mentioned it might be an RFQ or an RFI, but we're going to focus on the big one, the request for proposal, which is who we are, what we want, when we want it. You need an evaluation scorecard, a means by which you will evaluate and score the proposals and or demonstrations that individuals on your team will complete. And then you need a completed master scorecard, which is where you take all of the scores from the individual scorers or scoring teams, and you average them all together onto a master scorecard. And at that point, after you've gotten all of the scores finalized, the vendor with the highest score wins, period. Okay. Let's talk about that first deliverable, the request for proposal. Now, the most obvious thing that goes into this document is the requirements. What is it you want? And we're going to talk about that here in a little bit. But there's some other things that are important to make sure that are in your RFP. The organizational overview and mission. Who are we and what are we trying to achieve? And at an enterprise level, we're talking about OU in general. But when we get down into the colleges or the departments, I think it's important for you to be able to explain to a vendor, this is the type of organization we are. This is how we're structured. This is where we are. This is what we do. And this is what we're trying to accomplish so that you get better proposals from those vendors. You may want to explain to them the program goals. If we're buying a piece of software that's part of an overall program, what are those program goals? Who's the target audience? Who is going to use this system? If it's a financial system, you've got clerks and people who process invoices and POs using it. If it's a point of purchase system, it's customers using it. Who's the target audience going to use this? And really important is to clearly define as best you can how you want those vendors to format their proposals. You want a group of proposals that are organized very similarly. They should all have the same structure, so that you are comparing apples to apples. If you don't provide enough input to the vendors on how they're going to structure their proposals, then you get things that are very difficult to understand and parse out and compare. And this includes things like budget and cost breakdown. I always ask my vendors to very clearly delineate one-time costs. This may be licensing, implementation, data conversion, training, whatever it is. I want to know what costs I'm going to incur one time. And then I want to know in a separate bucket, what are ongoing costs, licensing, hosting, maintenance, because those are two different budget questions. Going and getting money one time to do something is a lot easier than getting somebody to commit to paying the licensing fees for 10 years for a system. So I always make sure that I get those as clearly defined as possible. And the more detail you can put into how you want to see the proposal, the better proposals you'll get that look alike so you can compare them. Tasks and timelines, how they explain the implementation process, asking for vendor and client staffing roles. On big enterprise implementations, I ask vendors to explain to me not only what staff are they going to bring to implement this system and what are their roles and expectations, but what staff do I have to bring to the table? If we're putting in an accounting system, then they've got some financial experts on the vendor side that are going to help us do that. But on my side, I've got the controllers. I've got people who are in charge of accounts receivable or accounts payable. And there's probably an expectation that team members on OU side are going to have to work with the vendor so many hours per week for however many weeks it takes to implement the system. And I typically ask vendors to define for me, who are you bringing to the table to implement this system and make a success? And who are you expecting me to bring to the table? And what are their roles and what are their expectations? I also often ask for the resumes of the people that they are going to submit. And then you may ask a request for references. This is more on a services side where you ask for references, but I have done reference reviews for software systems. So these requirements plus all of these things are important components of your RFP. Let's talk about some ways of determining requirements. Requirements can be grouped into multiple categories, and while all of the categories don't apply to all of the selection projects, it's valuable to examine each one and ask yourself, does this apply? What's my investment strategy? What are my business requirements? What are the stakeholders' requirements? The solution, the transition, the technical requirements, the must-have. I'm going to go through each of these and give you some examples of them. But my point is that it's helpful to think about what this system is supposed to do from multiple angles. So one of the first ones is this investment strategy idea. Are you trying to do something to transform your business? Are you getting into a new line of business? That's really different from just growing the business. If your goal is to increase the size, get more revenue, that's different from actually going into a new product line. Or maybe it's about keeping the lights on. Maybe it's nothing more than replacing a system you've already got and you're looking for something that's more effective, efficient, and cheaper. But asking yourself, what's the initial investment reason I'm doing this? And then business requirements. This are the top level. This is kind of back to your program goals and your mission. What are the strategic goals of my organization? And how do we measure success? I have explained to vendors that we want to put in a system so that we can increase the number of students we are able to recruit. And we are going to measure success by the number of applicants that we receive in any given time period. So what are you trying to do and how do you measure success? Another way of looking at requirements is from the different viewpoints from the different stakeholders. What do executives need out of this system? Maybe it's a high-level dashboard of information and data about the transactions that are going through the system. What does a system administrator need? Oh, well, they're all into security and user management. And how do you parse out permissions? Whereas the security folks want to make sure that this thing is compliant with all the laws, regulations, and policies. We want it to be, or the user or the customer, how does it actually function? So this is another one of those examples of looking at it from different angles. You as the facilitator of this and your subject matter experts need to at least take off your hat and put on the hat of one of these people and think about what they need. Or even better, go out and interview these people and utilize these different resources so that you can get good input for what needs to go into your RFP. There are various ways at looking how the system itself would work. Now, this is very specific to software, not services. But for instance, what are the functional features of the system? What does it do? How does it use information? What are the rules for it? There are functional capabilities. Is this an accounting system? Is this a regulatory review system? There are business rules about data that goes into it and how it will be managed. You can define how you're going to use the system with use cases, and I'll go into that in just a little bit. But I would say that one of the biggest mistakes people make in defining functional requirements is insisting that it work like however the system they have now works. And that's a bad idea. I've seen efforts put into configuring electronic systems so that they work as closely to the paper process as possible. And that's not the best way to do this. People are coming up with new ways of doing business. They're inventing new software systems for doing it. And we want to adopt those new ways when we can. So I think it's important to avoid specifying what the system's going to look like or what the buttons say on them or how the workflows are supposed to occur. You really want to stick with your outcomes. There's non-functional requirements, and this is more like performance. How fast does it work? How reliable is it? Is it up all the time? Does this system need to be available 99.9% of the time? Or does it just need to be available 40 hours a week? Or recoverability, if the system were to fail, how is it backed up? Accessibility. Accessibility is a big issue here at OU. We want to make sure that any software system we put in is able to be used by people with disabilities. And then security. What kind of non-functional requirements are there for how the system logs interactions? Now, very similar to non-functional requirements are technical requirements. They're slightly different, although even I get them confused sometimes when I'm trying to work with this. But this is more about like what browsers it must work in or what kind of system environments you expect. If you're going to have a production stack that says, I've got a test environment, I've got a training environment, I've got a production environment. A really big one that gets overlooked. This is something that gets overlooked is the transition requirements. Things that need to happen one time because you're going to move from the old system to the new system. And this typically looks one of two ways. On Friday, you stop using the old system, and on Monday, you start using the new system. And between Friday and Monday, you're going to move data and records from the old system to the new system so that when you get there on Monday, everything's ready to go. That data extract, transform, and load process needs to be defined and tested multiple times. It's a very big lift in an implementation project. But sometimes we really overlook thinking about how we're going to do that and then what we expect the vendor to do to support us with it. The other way that looks, as opposed to stopping on one day and starting the next day, is on Friday, you stop putting new business in the old system. And on Monday, you start putting new business in the new system, but you finish the old business in the old system. And if you're going to do, and there's reasons why you would do that, but defining how that's going to work and then setting those expectations for the vendor on how they're going to support you is often overlooked. And then training is another one of those items where you may have the vendor who has provided you with this software system train your core owners. Now, training is not a one-time thing. You're always going to have turnover and new employees that you need to train, but there's usually this initial train the trainer kind of thing. So transitional requirements, those things that get me off the old one and onto the new one. Sometimes we would define what we call must-have requirements. Must-have requirements are, if you don't do this, don't bother sending me a proposal. You're trying to get people to not send proposals if their system's not going to do what you need it to do. Sometimes these items can't even be scored. It's like, I'll give you an example. An integration with your organization's authentication technology, how we use our usernames and passwords to log in. Any software system out there has to work with OU's authentication system. And for the most part, it either does or it doesn't. It's not like it can do it kind of good or not so well or whatever it is. It either does or it doesn't. But there are certain items that I put on my RFP as must have. There's some examples of down there. The system must be multi-tenant single architecture. This is the idea that they're hosting one giant system and all their customers are all in this one system. So any upgrades, everybody gets them all at the same time. It either is that way or it isn't. A completed accessibility conformance report. This is the vendor telling you our system is usable by people with disabilities. It's accessible. Some people say they want to see a VPAT, but a VPAT is the template. It's the voluntary product accessibility template. When you complete a VPAT, it becomes an ACR. Now, it's on their honor that they're saying that it's accessible. And in fact, I have gotten proposals from vendors that included a completed ACR, but after we examined the system, we determined it wasn't as accessible as we wanted it to be. So there can be all kinds of must-have requirements. Take a moment there. Any questions, comments about this? Talk briefly about use cases. Use cases are a unique and specific way of documenting how the system will be used. And we could spend a whole hour talking about use cases. And truth here, I'm going to admit I'm not an expert on use cases. I've done them, but I'm not that expert on them. But they are really good for designing processes without the influence of technology. Me mentioning that you're going to explain how this thing works without trying to tell them what the screens are supposed to look like. And the idea is that you're trying to define the various ways that the different user types would use the system. Because not, how an administrator uses the system and how a customer uses the system are going to be different ways. Some use cases, such as logging in, they're the same for all cases. Here's an example of the scenario-based use case. A scenario-based use case is usually logged in tables in a Word document or in Excel. And it is a series of steps in which there's an action by the actor and a reaction by the system. I won't read it to you, but you can see in that screen capture of Excel at the bottom of the slide there that this is explaining a point of purchase system like Amazon. The actor can be a person, but it could also be another software system. And as this mentions, every step has an action and a reaction. Here's an example of doing a use case that's very similar, except using a diagram. And it's the same idea. It's a point of purchase system. Flowcharts are a good way of doing this. Okay, final steps for our RFP. We're going to get all these requirements from these users. We're going to have them in multiple meetings. We're going to talk about the requirements, the must-haves. We're going to talk about them from the various viewpoints of all the various users. And we're going to organize this in sections in Word. And at this point, you have an RFP. You've defined what the system's supposed to do. You've explained who we are, what our mission is, and what we're trying to achieve. And you could provide this to procurement. And by the way, just document this in a Word document. Don't try and put it into the RFP template that procurement uses. Let them do that. I mean, that's an OU thing, but lots of procurement departments are that way. You'll send this information to them, provide a list of vendors that you want them to contact to notify, because you're not going to do it. Everything goes through procurement. And then they're going to publish it on their website. But I'm here to tell you, you shouldn't publish the RFP until you've completed the scorecard, because the exercise of creating the scorecard is going to change things. People often say, I'm in a hurry. I've got the RFP. Let's put this out there. But if you can do it at all, get your team to create the scorecard first, because that's where some of the magic happens. Okay. Next, we're going to talk about the scorecard, but I want to take another opportunity. Any comments or questions? Scorecards are math exercises in Excel. What you're looking at is a scorecard that actually doesn't have any. The scores are all threes right now on a rubric from 1 to 5, which is why if you look at the screen capture in the top right, you'll see down the left side is A, B, C, D. Those are the requirements. Then the two columns on the top right are the vendors. So we assume there's going to be 3 proposals we are evaluating from vendor 1, 2, and 3. And then each one of those requirements has a different weight. If you look at requirement A1, of the total 100 points possible that a vendor could get for how well they do on their proposal, 40 of those points are from the first requirement in section A. That is a huge amount of influence. If you look at section B, there are 11 requirements in it, and the weight of each of those requirements totals to 35. But if you look at B1, that's only 2 of the points. B2 is only 1 point. So all of these different requirements influence the final score in different ways depending on the weight of them, how important they are. And these things in your scorecard are based on the requirements in the proposal, but it's not necessarily a one-to-one ratio. You may be putting in, I'm going to keep talking about a financial system. Let's say it's got an accounts payable element to it. You may have 25 requirements for how the accounts payable functions must work. But on your scorecard, you could have just one row. How well does their accounts payable solution work? Or maybe you broke those 25 requirements into 3 different groups of 3 different criterion in the scorecard itself. So not necessarily a one-to-one. And when I work with folks on this, what I typically tell them to do is we're going to set the weight for each section first. So in this one, A, B, C, and D, we decided A was 40, B was 35, C was 17, and D cost is 8. And then we go back and spread those points for each section out across the requirements that are in each section, or excuse me, the criterion that are each in each section. Notice just for a moment, though, that D cost section at the bottom. It's 8 points. Be careful about setting cost any higher than about 10% in your scorecard, or a vendor with an inferior product but a very low price could possibly win your selection. I get this argument all the time that cost is the most important thing. It's not. Performance is more important. How well it works is more important. But when we get to finally the individual scores, what you're looking at on this page is the master tab where we are averaging all the individual scorecards together. Weighting the scorecard is an interesting discussion. This example scorecard that you're looking at the screen had 300 criterion in it. And you can see that the weight of each criterion, they're less than 1, 0.5. There's a lot of those that are half a point. But the point of this is that that weight that you give to each of those sections and each of those criterion has to total to 100. And this is where the magic happens. When you force a group of subject matter experts to decide a numerical score they're going to give to each of these criterion in this scorecard, you are forcing a conversation about what do those criterion really mean. This is where you're going to find the nice to have items. This is where you're going to find duplicates. Whenever you first engage this group of subject matter experts and you ask them to start thinking about what requirements we need for this software system we're buying, one of the first things they're going to do is go out and search the internet for companies that provide solutions like that. They're going to go to the web page where the solution is described, and they're going to copy the bulleted list of the features, and they're going to send them in as requirements. That doesn't really mean that they're our requirements. Those are just features of the tool. And when people do it with different software solutions, different tools, you end up with lists of requirements that are worded differently, but really mean the same thing. But if you force this group of folks to put a numerical score on every one of these, then you're going to find them. People are going to have an in-depth conversation about what that really means, why we really need it. Our goals and objectives will become clearer and clearer and clearer, and more consensus amongst the group about what it is we're trying to do will occur in the exercise of scoring this, putting those weights into this scorecard. So as I mentioned, I think it's really important to create your scorecard and finalize it before you send the RFP to procurement, because I guarantee you're going to want to change it after the scorecard is completed. One last thing on scorecards here. You should complete them before you release the RFP. Thou shalt complete them before anybody looks at proposals. Looking at the proposals and then changing how you're going to score them is unethical. That's phishing. That's oh, I can't remember the phrase now, but it's we're doing science here. So don't change how you're going to score them and after you have reviewed the proposals. Any questions on that?
Hi, Kevin.
Yes.
I'm actually in procurement, so this is a wonderful training and I appreciate it. And so it is helpful to have all of this stuff ready before you submit to us, but we may ask you questions and change things. So there's not pressure to have everything perfect. Um, and we won't actually let you change the scoring after it closes.
Awesome.
Because it's a no-no in our business. So we'll make sure that you have all of this and we'll lead you through all of it too. But this is great. Keep going.
Thank you, Kimberly. That's awesome. Okay, let's talk about rubrics. The scoring, the 1 to 5 score that you're giving each feature of the software. You've got your scorecard, you're reading through the proposal, and you're going, oh, it does this one pretty good. I'm going to give it a 1, a 2, a 3, or 4, or 5. This rubric that you see on the top left is the most common rubric in the world. 3 is average, above average for 4, far above average, blah, blah, blah. But it didn't have to be that way. In fact, the first thing I would challenge you to do is decide if you want an even or odd numbered rubric, because an odd numbered rubric has a neutral center score. People can put 3s and it doesn't mean anything really. If you want to force folks to go above or below, then reduce it to a 4-point rubric. Now they got to go, now there's no middle point, and they got to decide if it's slightly good or slightly bad or really good or really bad. You can also create rubrics that are specific to what it is you're selecting. So the 2 rubrics on the left are kind of about software systems. Notice how the top one, it doesn't meet the requirements. 2, it meets it with modifications. 3, it does it. 4, it does it really well. 5, it did it in a way that we weren't even expecting. We didn't know that kind of feature was out there. The one on the bottom left is very similar. But notice those 3 values in the middle: manual workaround versus customization, which is recoding the thing, versus configuration. That's okay. That's just going in and checking boxes in the system, or just does it. And that bottom right one is the actual rubric of a survey I took yesterday for what my opinion is on vacation styles. The biggest thing about rubrics is making sure that everybody's on the same page. First of all, and I don't know what you might want to do, force ranked order, but I typically don't. But what I've seen is if my rubric is 1 to 5 and I've got 5 vendors, some people get it in their head that they're supposed to give one of them a 1, one of them a 2, one a 3, 4, and a 5, and it's a forced rank, and it's not. For any given criterion, if all the vendors are doing the same thing, then by definition, that's average, and they should all get 3s. Another thing people have problems with rubrics is that if it doesn't do the feature, whatever it is, they want to give them a 0 instead of a 1. We're not actually measuring things, we're comparing them, and it's okay for 1 to mean it doesn't do it. But it's absolutely worth it with your team before they start filling out scorecards to make sure everybody understands these elements of the rubric, how they work, and everybody's on the same page. All right, let's talk about some techniques for reviewing and evaluating proposals and completing the master scorecard. When folks are sending you proposals, they are describing how their company's system, software, or their experts are going to solve your problem. A good vendor can clearly explain that they understand us and our problem, they understand the goal, and that they've got the resources, tools, and experience to fix it. And what a real solid definition of an experienced and competent vendor. In fact, this is the definition of any experienced and competent team. A group of people that have been working together using a particular set of tools or technologies to solve a typical set of problems for a given type of customer. So somebody's been working together using technology to solve problems like ours for people like us. When you see that formula, that's a competent vendor. The vendors that have been doing all kinds of work for the military, but have never done any work in higher ed, I'd be a little leery of. One's proposing brand new technologies, or that they're going to go hire staff for this effort. I'm here to tell you that one of the biggest indications of team's performance are those four variables. It's also important to look to hopefully to get proposals where vendors are able to explain that they are unique and have a competitive advantage over the other vendors. So let's look at this continuum on the bottom. Left and right are bad, the middle's good. My RFP said, build me a blue box that's 2 feet tall. And on the left end of the spectrum, I got the parrot. This is the vendor that goes, we'll build you a blue box that's 2 feet tall. Okay, great. You didn't tell me anything about why your blue boxes are better or why you're going to be better at it than anybody else or anything. You just told me you're going to do it. And on the other end of the spectrum is the boilerplate. This is where they don't really even address your RFP. You just get marketing material. It's like they didn't even read your RFP. They just got together some flyers and sent them in. And this is where they're saying things like, oh, we build boxes all the time, red ones, yellow ones. In the middle is Goldilocks. This is where they clearly they make it very clear that they are responding to your request and going above and beyond. And I know this is a little theoretical, but this would look like we're going to build you a blue box that's 2 feet tall with these features that we invented that are valuable to your industry. See, our boxes have these special latches that faculty find it easy to unlock. That's the kind of thing you're looking for. The vendors that differentiate, that answer the RFP, that really do address what you're asking for, and then explain that they've got the experience of solving those problems and that they've got something that nobody else has got. Okay, what kind of questions? Any questions or comments? Let's talk about demonstrations. When you're buying software systems and you can afford to take the time to do it, it's absolutely valuable to have the vendors come in and conduct demonstrations. Now, if I get 8 proposals, hopefully it will be easy enough to determine the 3 best ones. I don't like having to evaluate more than 3 to 5 vendors. I've done it with 11, but it's a huge amount of work, and after a while, it becomes difficult to keep up with which vendor you're looking at. But just for a moment, just imagine that we got 7 proposals and 3 of them were obviously superior. So I'm going to ask those 3 vendors to come on site or in a Zoom meeting and demonstrate how their system works. It is imperative that you provide them with a demonstration script or some bad things are going to happen. First of all, they're going to come in the room and spend most of the time trying to develop a relationship with you. They're going to talk with you and be friendly and go on and tell you how great their company is and go into their history and not give you as much information about the system because they're trying to become friends with you so that you'll buy their stuff, as opposed to demonstrating superiority of their product so you'll buy their stuff. So I typically say, you get 5 minutes to do an introduction, and that's it. After that, you've got to start demonstrating to us how the system works. You want to put together a demonstration script and have all of the vendors run that same exact script so that you're able to compare apples to apples, oranges to oranges. And there's some examples here on the screen: usability, the business glossary, data quality, and how many minutes they get to demonstrate them. If you can provide a demonstration script to every vendor, that's good. That's a good demonstration script. A great demonstration script has 2 versions. The one you give the vendor that tells them what they're going to show you and how long they've got, and the ones you give to the people filling out the scorecards that say, when they get into usability, these are criterions A1, A3, and A5, so that the scorers they've read the proposals and they filled out a draft scorecard. They put their 1, 2, 3s, and 5s in, but now they're watching the demonstration and they're updating those scores based on this new information in the demo. So a great demonstration script tells the vendor what to demo and tells the scorers, when they demo this, it's these line items on the scorecard that you should update. You may want to talk to references. This is, as I mentioned, this is big in services, selecting services. I would want to absolutely talk to references when I'm selecting somebody just to provide services, but I've also done it for software systems. you need a script. You're going to get on the phone, you're going to call somebody up and say, hey, what do you think of these guys? But you want to step through a script and ask all the references. Let's see, you're going to talk to three of them. Ask all three references the exact set of questions again, so that you get a set of answers that you can kind of compare. You want to talk to references that are in a similar industry, size, maturity, and context. If I'm buying stuff for OU, I want to talk to references at other institutions of higher education. I might talk to somebody else. I may not be that interested in talking to really small colleges or really huge colleges. I'm going to talk to universities that are similar in size to OU. But the flip side of that is you want to try and get references that have been with this vendor a really long time and references that are brand new, that just bought the system. Because the references that have been using that vendor for a long time can tell you about their support, how well they respond when things go wrong, how they do their release management when they upgrade the system. And the new customers can tell you about how good they are right recently at implementing that system and how well the new version of the software works. And I always conduct these as a group. I've actually had references in the scorecard where at the end of we did all the references and then we scored the vendors on what we thought the information back from them was. There's actually numbers in the scorecard, but it doesn't have to be that way. We've sometimes just used it as an elimination mechanism. We've, strangely enough, gotten references from vendors that when we called them, they said, we just hate these people. Apparently they are incompetent. They don't even know you hate them. And so we went, yeah, let's go ahead and drop them. There may be items on your scorecard that your local group of subject matter experts should not score. And these are typically around financial stability. We don't want to buy things from fly-by-night organizations that might go bankrupt next week. But the people that are the subject matter experts on my team may not be financial experts. So sometimes I go talk to my friends in financial services and say, could you guys go do a little research on these companies? And they'll go look up their Dun and Bradstreet information, things like that, and give you their opinion on how financially stable the different vendors are. And you take that opinion, and I've actually had them score it. I'd give this one a 3, I'd give this one a 4. So I don't have my scoring team give me scores that I'm going to average together for financial stability nor security features. I ask my financial expert friends to give me the scores for those. And on the security features, I talk to my security friends in information technology and say, can you look at these parts of the proposals and score them from 1 to 5? And then that becomes the final score for those sections. We're going to score cost, and you'll almost always do. Those are numbers. You don't need people to give you their opinion of scores. You can run math that will tell you on a scale from 1 to 5 what the costs mean. But one of the most common ways I see people doing this is low cost to high cost instead of 0 to high cost. So if you look at that little spreadsheet example down there, on the left, there are 2 examples, vendor A, B, and C, then vendor A, B, and C. And if the top one is $10, $9, and $8, and if you do an index from low cost to high cost, the scores are 5, 3, and 1. If the prices were $9,998, $9,999, and $10,000, and you index from low to high, they're 5, 3, and 1 again. But statistically speaking, those numbers aren't different. So if you index from 0 to the high cost, you get those numbers you see in the superior column. And what you see is that ABC 10,000, 9,099, 9,098, they're 5.0, 5.996, or excuse me, 4.996 and 4.9992. That is a more superior way of doing it. It takes some Excel magic to make it work, but I've put the formula on the slide. So if you ask me for the presentation after this, you'll get the formula. I've got people that I've assigned to look at the proposals and fill out a scorecard. Maybe to look at demonstrations and update those scores. Sometimes when we're providing a solution, and let's say we're providing it to 5 different colleges, we allow each college to submit 1 scorecard. They may have 3 to 12 people in each college evaluating the proposals and the demonstrations, but I want each college to have an equal voice. So in that case, you get teams of people all turning in a scorecard. But once we get there, they send them to me and I compile them into my master scorecard. This is an example of what the second tab on my Excel spreadsheet looks like. On the right side, you see reviewers 1, 2, 3, and 4. That could say business, architecture, engineering, graduate college. It could say Bob, Mary, Jane, Larry, whatever. Those are the people or teams that submitted a scorecard. On the far left side, you see the individual criteria that we are utilizing to evaluate this proposal. And in the middle, you see a heat map that is measuring disagreement. I want to know where the biggest deltas in understanding are, and I want to resolve them. So once I paste these 4 sets of scores into this thing, and I get the folks in the room with me to talk about the scores, I say, whoa, you folks don't agree on how vendor A provides requirement E. The level of disagreement is 5.83. Don't worry what that number means. It's just high. It's bright red. And if you look out across there, you see that reviewer 1 gave him a 1, reviewer 2 gave him a 2, 3 gave him a 3, and 4 gave him a 4. This is an example for demonstration purposes. And what I would do is say, reviewer 1, tell me why you think that score should be so low. And reviewer 4, tell me why you think that score should be so high. And there's a little discussion there. And 98% of the time, somebody goes, oh, I missed that. I didn't realize it did that. And a couple people go, oh, you can raise my score to a 3. And that level of disagreement goes way down. Sometimes people go, wait, your understanding is that it works very poorly. I did not realize that that's how bad that is. Lower my score. I've had one time in my entire career where there were high and low scores and they wouldn't budge. That, nope, I'm sticking to my high, I'm sticking to my low, and that's okay. They don't have to agree. I just want to make sure we have the discussion about those areas where there's disagreement. So I'm going to look at this red section. The next reddest one is how vendor B provides requirement B. I'm going to look out there. There's 2 4s, a 3, and a 2. So I'm going to ask the guy with the 2 to explain his low score, and I'm going to ask one of the folks with the 4s to explain their high score, and we're going to go through it. But I don't need to discuss how vendor A provides requirement C. The level of disagreement is 0. All the scores are the same, or any of those that are mildly green. I'm just going to focus in on where we disagree and have you discuss why we disagree to make sure we didn't miss something. Again, this group is having their voice heard. They're being driven to consensus, and they're coming up with a decision that they can all support. This can reach a point of diminishing returns. I mean, you're not trying to discuss it all to green. It's not going to happen. There's an amount of time you can afford to spend discussing the scores, but hit those points. By the way, you can do the heat map with range, just what's the distance from high to low, or standard deviation, I think is a better way of doing it. My favorite way of doing this, and I'm a nerd, so I'm really into this, is the standard deviation divided by the count of the mode. So if you had 4 scores and 4 people gave him a 3 and 1 person gave him a 1, the mode is 3, but the count of mode is 4. There were 4 3s. So I take the standard deviation, I divide it by the count of the mode, and I find that gives me really good disagreement values. It's a real pain in the butt to code that in Excel. So if you'd like to get into that kind of thing, contact me and we'll have a nerdy conversation about math. Otherwise, range is easy to do. And there are online software systems that provide this kind of functionality, and they all use range. After we've had that discussion, all those scores get averaged onto the first tab of the spreadsheet. Everybody's individual scores are averaged together. And on the main tab, you'll start seeing scores like 3.87, 4.12, because they're average numbers. The vendor with the highest score wins, period. If you've done a good job of defining your requirements, having this group debate those requirements and put scores on them, had them review proposals, see demonstrations, contact references, and then you've had an intense, in-depth discussion about those areas on the scorecard where they don't agree, your score represents the best possible decision you can make. And then if I ever get a request from a vendor saying, please show us the scorecard you used, I print the main tab to PDF. They never get the names of the people that provided the scores. I don't want vendors coming in going, gee, why does Mary and Dave disagree on this so much? They don't get to know that. They get to know the scores for each section on the main tab. I print that to a PDF. It gets sent to them. And as I mentioned, I never hear from them again. One last thing, there are some unique challenges you can run into if you do this. Multiple vendor proposals. If you're going to ask for a great big enterprise system and you need somebody to help you implement that system, then you need to decide ahead of time what kind of proposals you want to see. Because some vendors are going to say, we've got a software package we can sell you and we're going to implement it. Software works like this and it costs this. Our implementers do these kinds of things and it costs this. Other vendors may send you proposals that say, we don't sell a product. We're going to buy this other thing. We're going to help you buy this other thing and we get a good deal on it. And then we're going to implement it for you. Some vendors may send you proposals for just a system and no implementation. Some vendors may send you a proposal for just an implementation and no system, and you can't compare them. So you really need to decide what you're expecting ahead of time. My favorite way to do this is, and again, it's expensive and takes time, is pick a system. We're not asking about implementation at this time. Then pick an implementer and just do it in 2 passes. But a thing that can really help you make this decision is looking at the market. If you're going to buy Huron's Clicks platform, they have a regulatory review platform called Click. You can buy that and Huron's going to implement it for you. There's nobody else that does that. And there are other types of software systems out there where the vendor always does implementation. And so once you do your research, you got to find out what kind of vendors are in the market. Do they offer systems and implementation, or are there ones that just do implementation and figure that out? The other one's a big challenge for this is products versus services. And I've been kind of talking about both of those, though I have certainly focused on software or system selections. But products are more about the features that drive outcomes, and services are more about the experiences. So somebody selling you a product is going to say, it works this way, it does these things. Somebody selling you a service is going to say, we've done this before for other customers like you, and this is how well it went. Service vendors need to do a good job of demonstrating the knowledge and understanding of who the customer is, what their goal is, and demonstrate that they've got experience solving that kind of thing for similar customers. And the product vendors are need to demonstrate that they've got something that's uniquely valuable to your organization. Couple comments on the scorecards. Scorecards for services tend to be very short, 8 to 10 items. It's all about, do you understand what we need? And what quality of people do you bring to the table? And how well did you explain the implementation timeline and requirements? There's not a whole lot of them. System selections can get out of hand, where I showed you an example and I said, this one had 300 criterion on it. That was too much. We should have consolidated more of those down so there wasn't such an onerous task of scoring the system. So I don't think you should ever have more than 100 items when you're selecting a software system. And I often have less than 50. All right, that's all I had to explain today. Tell me what questions and comments you have.